Somebody wrote me a message telling me that he had spent the majority of his life in the place he was born. He had not traveled much. He's some age older than me. Handsome man. Well endowed, I'm sure, in more ways than one. And he said, after 9 years, I have not found a suitable mate here, and don't imagine I ever will, so I must find somewhere else to live where I can find a more suitable companion. And with all the arrogant wisdom that we have, I said to him, it doesn't matter where you go from someone who has spent the majority of my life looking for the suitable companion. There is no place where you will find one more eligible, more suitable, more available than where you are right now. He said something about his mother saying that long-term relationships, like a good marriage, was a choice. And I said something about unconditional love, and he said, unconditional love has to be earned. I didn't see this until I woke up in the morning today, and I responded to him that, like most people, he's misunderstanding unconditional love. Unconditional love is something that is not earned. It is a choice you make, and everyone is deserving of it. And it is unconditional. There is no cause for it. And it is unconditional love that allows relationships to be long. Because no one is the ideal mate. No one is perfect. When I look at people's love stories, a meme that I've encountered recently in certain gay groups I belong to, and then also just publicly on people's timelines, is people saying, post pictures of yourself in a happy relationship. And hundreds of replies, hundreds, in a few of these things. People happily smiling with their partner. And looking at Facebook, I have seen people mourn the loss of the best man I have ever known. Dying younger than their older partners of cancer or car crashes or myriad, I was just reading Love in the Time of Cholera, which I started probably a month ago. I'm a very slow reader. I always have been. It's only the second book I've ever read from Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Because I'm attempting to learn Spanish and have a tendency for overreaching my abilities, I downloaded a copy of it in English and in Spanish. And when I first started reading it, was jumping back and forth between the two. I did learn a few words, but for the most part, my brain was just addled with trying to make sense. It was very difficult to start reading that book. Now, we've been in a crisis. We've been in a pandemic, much like cholera. But the book has made it very clear that the main disease it is talking about is not cholera, but love. the idea of love, the quotidian reality of love. What does love mean? How does it play out? What is the language of love? Two days ago, I read the entire 5th chapter in one sitting. It's been incredibly difficult for me to get through the book. Yesterday, I didn't try to read it at all, and today I set out to finish the book and got 49 pages from its ending when my alarm went off, which you just saw a minute ago, that I set because I was like, well, I've got to do my talk. And I wondered if I'd be able to finish the book before my talk, or I would leave the book wherever it was. I was curious, you know. The book's fucking amazing. He's a fucking amazing writer. And I have expressed to one of my friends that the book, like most of the books I admire, it has a plot, it has ingenious devices, but mostly it's peopled with incredibly wise statements about how humanity works in between events happening. To describe the weather or the movement of a person, it gives this amazing depiction of how the human mind and heart works in apparent throwaway sentences. It's fucking genius. A few years ago, I found myself in the depths of suffering from the loss of love. I had various friends that I was unable to love, unable to be loved by. I had just lost 2 friends that had both died of cancer, both old men, which tends to be my taste, within a week of each other, and started another love at that junction, who I saw a gazillion red flags and then decided, you know, I'm gonna love this person anyway. And in that love, filled in all of the gaps of why my life wasn't working, which is what I had always asked love to do. The spackle, the grout that made the whole mosaic fit together, all these disparate, broken pieces that, this is the picture, this is the life I've been waiting for. It just seemed to give meaning to all the meaninglessness and motivation for all the hopelessness. This person, of course, was not at all interested in being that kind of glue, and that's not what the fate of it was anyway. Within a few months, it had dissolved, and I was left destitute and broken and crying for months on end. It was a very interesting meditation on what I thought love was, because I had been trying for a long time not to fall in love. I still have a habit to this day, but I don't take it as seriously, that pretty much every time I have sex with someone, not to mention seeing someone in public that I find attractive in a natural way, like when my body is motivated to be like, who is that? I don't know if you have that, where you just turn and be like, what's that? Who's that? This kind of unconscious draw. But of course, I don't just have it towards one person, I have it towards millions. Of just imagining a whole future that we'll have together. So like having sex with somebody I don't know their name happens. Just like imagining a whole future where maybe this is the one. And I've had that my whole life. So I worked really hard to not believe it. Well, I lived in New York City. The first person who fell in love with me when I decided to become a resident of New York City very quickly gave me the version of love. At that point in my life, I had practiced saying I love you to people all the time. As a traveler, I had no fears because I was always moving on. Nobody could get sticky and possessive with me. But upon getting an address, this person who fell in love with me because I said I love you to him, which is not what I was asking for. I wasn't asking for falling in love. I was sharing the humanity, the love of humanity, the human love with someone. You are worthy of love, and I love you because I'm here and I'm a person, and you need love, and I need love, and I love you. It's okay. He gave me back jealousy, suspicion, greed, fear, not hatred. Well, hatred of other people. Eventually threatening to kill somebody who showed interest in me in the kindest way. And it terrified me that having been free of this kind of love for so long, I all of a sudden was faced with it again. And with someone that I liked so much as a friend. And I was very clear I wanted him as a friend. And he was very clear he wanted me as the love grout to complete all of his broken pieces, which I had no interest in doing. So I closed my heart against love and still suffered greatly from my habit of imagining love affairs with people. After deciding to love this one person that was no more or less worthy of my love than any other person, I then found myself talking to an old, not friend, somebody who I had fallen in love with in the forest of Tennessee upon meeting, and imagined a whole future with him, and maintained a type of connection with him through gay hookup apps and following his Facebook threads, and occasionally commenting that I was always aware that he was an arrogant prick. He was born in the year of the cock. He just had this like, oh, you like me? That's great. I'm glad you like me. I'm really glad you like me. It's great you like me. And when he saw me suffering so greatly in the end of my losing my loves, losing my apartment, losing my friends who died, being unable to love and be loved by my actual friends in the way that I needed, and then this absolute absurd love affair with this man, he said, you should just come here and stay with me and just take a break. Just come here and stay with me and take a break. And I said, wow. Again, being surprised, this person that I had just taken as a arrogant, chauvinistic prick who was just like, I think it's so great that you think I'm so great, because he really does have a personality like that. He's like, I'm really fucking awesome. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's really hard to be intimate with that. And to make this long story kind of shorter, I went to stay with him. I agreed to go stay with him, and then I admitted to him that I had fallen in love with him, and I met him. And so when I arrived, he had told everybody that we were boyfriends and that I had to be monogamous with him, and that when I arrived, he said, it's the first time in my life I've not wanted to kill myself, and I'm bipolar, and I haven't been taking medication. And I was just like, fuck, what? And of course, within a couple weeks, he told me that I made him want to kill himself, and he was acting incredibly jealous and crazy, and kicked me out, telling me that if I didn't leave, he was going to kill himself. And then after another week, I got back together with him, because I was like, look, I don't really want to be here. I came here to be with you. It's more expensive for me to fly home, to buy a new ticket. And I think you're very interesting. So if you want to do this love thing, and this is the only way I can be with you, let's decide to love each other. And I said, I know that you're, crazy. Don't call me crazy. So, sorry, you're not crazy. I know that, you have a lot of triggers, and I'm not and you don't actually like me. And he's like, I do. And I'm like, no, you don't. You just like that I like you. That's all you like. But we have 2 weeks left. So here's the deal. Can we commit to ourselves and to each other that every day we will start by loving each other? We don't have to love each other for the rest of our lives. We don't have to love each other for the rest of the 2 weeks I'm here. We just have to love each other for that day. Just that day. And we have to stick to that. And if one of us forgets that we have committed to starting the day by committing to love each other all day that day, they have to help each other through until we remember. And he was like, okay, crying, okay, let's try it. I came up with this solution as desperation, out of desperation. But it was amazing how effective it was. Him being bipolar and drinking a lot of alcohol and smoking a lot of pot, he would generally spiral into insanity at least once a day. And very often it was aimed at me, and he would tell me what a horror I was and what a horrible person I was and how I had no heart and could never love anybody, etc., etc. And I would just sit there and see him suffering and know that he had no ability, he had no tools, he had such damage, he had no way to make better choices. And I just loved him. And I was fucking amazed at how well this worked. Because eventually he'd come back and he'd cry and he'd get in my arms and he'd be like, I'm so sorry, thank you so much. And I'd just be like, I love you, it's okay. Sex, we had a really awesome, passionate sexual relationship. It became something totally different. It was like what I had always wanted, like this intense, healing, focused thing. But again, I became the master of it. I was making the choices, I was enacting. I became the top, but more than that. Because he was very insistent on being versatile, but was always topping me at the beginning. And then when we were in this place, I was like, I am in control of this situation, and I'm holding this together. There was only one day that I remember that I couldn't love him. He didn't extend kindness towards me during that moment, but he extended indifference, which allowed for tolerance. And we kept up a type of activity that allowed us to not really interact with each other, but be busy around each other. And within a few hours, we were totally in love again. And so many people commented on how beautiful it was to witness our love. A few years later, maybe the next year, it was the next year, I guess it was a year and a half later, I visited a man I had met once before at a ritual. And he was the old friend of one of my greatest lovers. No, he was the old friend of one of my oldest friends, but he was also connected to one of my longest lovers. And he had been with his partner for something like 45 years, who had died 2 years previously. So when I sat with him and talked with him, he would talk about anything and remember his husband and cry. And he was able to talk about the horribleness of their relationship and how much every day, how he loved him and how much he missed him. And I remember asking him, would you want him back? If you could have him back alive, would you want him back? And he said, no. I'm very grateful for the freedom I have now. And I'm very grateful to not have to put up with his criticisms, his judgments, and his control, and his sickness, and his compulsions. He was a hoarder. But I still love him to this day, He told me that they got together out of a mutual kink back in the day, and both had a fondness for hiking. And when they decided to move away from the city and move into the country together, their relationship started to become very strained because they didn't have any distractions besides each other. And the relationship started to get kind of ugly, and they decided to go to relationship counseling. And the counselor had asked them, well, I think you need to understand what the point of your relationship is. What do you guys actually want out of your relationship? And they both had the same desire. They both clearly laid out that they wanted the relationship that their parents had. And for the sake of this story, we'll say the relationship they imagined their parents had. Someone that you loved forever and grew old with, and eventually died together. It was close as possible. So the therapist said to them, then I think what you need to do is prioritize love. And he told me that every day they started the day by saying, I love you to each other. And I love that this came after this experience I had with this other fellow. They said they started every day, the first thing they said to each other was, I love you. A conscious choice they made, it was an effort. And every day his husband would write him a note. And it might be like, if you're going into town, pick up milk. It might be something about how your face reminds me about the goodness in the world. Could be all sorts of things. But he would always sign the note in these initials, which were something like ILYMTYBMT or something like that. But it stood for, I love you more than I did yesterday and less than I will tomorrow. He'd always sign with that. And I said, so did you guys never fight anymore? And he said, no, we fought. Sometimes I love you in the morning was the only thing we said to each other for a few days. But we never said hurtful things to each other on purpose. We prioritized love in all of our actions regarding each other. And I was like, wow, that's fucking amazing. And when he told me what the relationship devolved into, like all these personality things and the hoarding and the sickness, I was just like, wow. So between those two stories, I started doing these meditation retreats, and actually a couple years before that, I walked across Spain. Right when I walked across Spain, before I walked across Spain, there was this book I read. I think it was just called The Pilgrimage by Paulo Coelho. It was the first book he ever wrote in his mid-40s, and the next book he wrote was The Alchemist, which made him one of the most read writers in the entire world. But in The Pilgrimage, it's kind of like a ritual book. He has a lot of ritual books he's written. I have not read a lot of his books, but one of the rituals in it was that while walking, his teacher told him that every time he noticed his mind say something mean to himself, about himself, that he should dig his index fingernail into the knuckle of his thumb. And of course, within a few days, his thumb was a bloody mess, and it was absolutely agonizing. But eventually he got the message of how much these little things we say to ourselves hurt ourselves. And I thought of that in these meditation retreats because I had no concept of how cruel my mind was to myself. I had no idea. I, like many people, was suffering under the illusion that the things my mind said about me were true, and that somehow by chastising myself I would be fixed somehow, corrected. There was a phrase somebody had introduced me to a few years before called reparenting. They're like, your parents say horrible shit to you when you're a kid. They don't realize how horrible it is. And you think it's true because you don't know anything because you're a kid and they're your parents and so they're gods. And then when you grow up and you're not living with your parents anymore, you've internalized those voices from your childhood and you just keep saying them to yourself all the time. And so you have to imagine who you could be as a better parent to love you. A better parent, a parent that is forgiving and kind and patient and compassionate. And you have to turn the voices in your head into that parent. And I was like, but this phrase really stuck with me, reparenting. So while I was in these meditation retreats and noticing how horrible my mind was, and there was this teacher who was on many of the retreats I went with, and of course one of the things I love about it was I listened to one of his Dharma talks before going to the first retreat I went to with him, and I disliked his voice because it sounded so bland and boring. But he ended up being this humble person who was just all heart, as some people say. He was just all heart. And he often talked about how when he first started doing meditation retreats, his mind was his worst enemy. but he can honestly say, whatever, 30 years into it now, that his mind has become his best friend. I marveled at the idea of this when I noticed how cruel my mind was. But I was inspired by it. And I think it was in the second retreat I did, not the first. Definitely in the first, I started extending love and forgiveness and compassion to all other beings. But I think it was the second retreat that I started extending it to myself, and it was certainly in the third retreat, which was 3 months long, that I began this practice where every time I noticed my mind saying anything unkind to myself, I would say, "I love you, Dominic," and stop right there. And this was really difficult because, again, I had become so invested over my life in believing all these things that were wrong with me, that I needed to tell myself I was so bad or stupid or wrong or whatever for having these traits. And I had all these reasons that were airtight. They were certainly true. And there was no logistical defense against chastising myself. But what I had learned in these retreats was there was zero benefit to hurting myself, because I had the sensitivity and the patience and the kindness and the boredom to notice what it felt like to be cruel to myself. Like to really, like, multidimensionally, multiple perspectives, feel what it was like. And just like one of the things that they insist upon in Buddhism is that you don't really have a self. So you constantly are re-selfing, you're selfing, you're constantly reconstructing this idea of who you are, like by telling the stories of your past and telling the stories of your future and collecting tokens of this is who I am, these are my character traits, these are my stories, this is my... But they're like, it's not true, you're really just everything and nothing. So that's the real reality of it. And, you know, I won't go into that whole tangent, but I got enough understanding of that concept, anatta, selflessness, that I realized that any of the beliefs I had about myself that made me worthy of hatred, that made me unworthy of love, were not worthwhile keeping. And in fact, didn't need to be kept because they didn't actually belong to me. So when I would notice I was on a process of self-destruction, self-defeat, self-chastisement, whatever, I would just immediately stop it and say, "I love you, Dominic." And in that patience and silence and time, I was able to take the time, be it a second or a minute or an hour, to feel what that felt like. To feel what it felt like to hurt myself and to feel what it felt like to love myself. Even with that simple phrase, "I love you, Dominic." But it was an amulet. It was an emblem of self-defense. It was a shield. It was a magic spell. It wasn't something I believed. I just understood the practicality of it. And I understood the desperation of needing to escape from the endless torment of not being perfect. Now, Buddhism talks about this practice of unconditional happiness. And then mainly the rationale is that we have an equation in our mind for happiness that never works. That is, if I get what I want, it will make me happy. And if I get away from the things that are irritating me, I will be happy. There are things making me unhappy. If I can get them out of the picture and get away from them or somehow destroy them, then I will be happy. And then there are other things that I need that will make me happy. And when I get those things, I'll be happy. But this never actually works because anything you get is no longer something you want. So you need to want something else. And then you change when you get it. So that's part of the changing thing. But it changes, you change. Everything's always changing. So you can't ever really get what you want. You're never really satisfied. Thank you, Steve. And you can practice just being happy for no reason. I had never been a big fan to valuing happiness. There was some D.H. Lawrence book I read when I was a kid that made me think, I think it was Sons and Lovers. Damn your happiness, I need meaning. And I just thought happiness was a byproduct of living a good life, and that if you strove to be happy, you were a fool. I hated the whole concept that America was based on freedom and the pursuit of happiness, or whatever that phrase is. I just thought it was idiotic. It was driving people to insanity and stupidity because you can't try to be happy. Happiness was a byproduct of living a good life. But this new concept that was given to me was that happiness was a choice you make at every moment, independent of conditions. So they didn't use the term unconditional happiness, but it came to me when I was doing all my Taoist practices, because as if you tuned into last night's class, you can go into your emotional body and just conjure emotions unconditionally. Not because you deserve to be happy or deserve to be grateful or anything is deserving of your gratitude, but because you choose to do it. And the reward is living in that emotional space. So love is like that. Love is a choice you can make, independent of all conditions. And yet conditions are so seductive, which is part of what inspired me to want to talk about this right now. I was reading Love in the Time of Cholera, getting very near its end, and coming upon... One of the things I love about reading ebooks is you can click on a word and look up a definition, right? So I've been doing this throughout the book, and there was a description of a dress that Fermina Daza was wearing, made out of a fabric called étamine. I don't know, a French word that I didn't know. And I was just curious. I was like, what is that fabric? So I clicked on it, and the dictionary came up, and the only definition it had was in Italian, because I have an Italian dictionary in my phone, because I've been trying to learn Italian over the last 2 years. And I read it out loud because that would make more sense to me. And there were 2 sentences in the dictionary definition, and in reading it out loud, I felt all of these cogs clicked into place. I noticed that I had enough understanding of Italian that I could pronounce the words correctly, as far as I can tell, and could understand enough of the words in the context to comprehend basically what it was describing. And as I heard my voice reading this sentence to myself, I felt respect and admiration for a 41-year-old man who had always had the dream to learn another language and was putting in his effort to the best of his ability and achieving, however slowly. And the phrase popped out of my head automatically, as I have trained it to do in defense against self-cruelty. I love you, Dominic. But this time the phrase wasn't a defense. This time the phrase was an authentic appreciation of someone I admired and had compassion and respect for. It hit me like a fucking sunshine. I don't know. It was amazing just to feel that, like, that's a totally different experience. To feel that kind of love. And I do believe that that is the passion, path, commitment, condition. Most people's unconditional love, when they achieve it for a child or a partner, is entirely conditional because they believe they have that unconditional love for them because they are a child or because they are a partner. If they achieve it at all. Because again, the majority of partnerships are these constant bitternesses and ridicules and attacks that are love, but they're not kind. They're not. It's like a battle. Like you have to. It's like you're constantly saying to your partner, "You have to deserve my love." There was some meme I read, not meme, post. Somebody said, every time I get together with some guy, I find myself arguing with him within a few weeks. Is this normal for you guys who have long-term relationships? Is this something that always happens? And it was great. Again, there was hundreds of replies to this on Facebook. And there were a few people who were like, I never fight with my husband, so no, you don't need to fight with your husband. But the majority of them were just like, we fight every fucking day. Or, oh yeah, we fight every once in a while, but none of us take it seriously. We just yell at each other and say cruel things, and then we forget about it and get on with our day. And in just reading through lots and lots of these, I saw all the different personalities that people have that I've been able to typify by astrology and other kind of things. And just being like, oh yeah, it's just part of our language of love. I've always described, I was talking with my sister yesterday about this, that my father's language of love is, if he gets intimate with anyone, he attacks them. That's just what intimacy means with him. And so his business partners and his friends always think he's such a nice guy because he keeps his emotional body completely shut off and isolated from them. But with his family, he has an automatic intimacy, so he's cruel. And he always laughs because he's like, I don't know why you're hurt by it. You know, he does this thing. He's like, because to him, that's his language of love, to attack, ridicule, pierce, poke, irritate, scooch, whatever the fucking word is, Italian. Different people have different languages of love. Violence. This guy that I was talking about earlier, he told me that the greatest love he'd ever had in his life had beat the shit out of him regularly, and he felt that that meant that he really loved him. We all have different languages of love, right? But this man I was talking to, who said that he'd been looking 9 years for the perfect mate, and he was not going to be found here. Have to go somewhere else. I cannot tell you how many times I've done things like that, and how many people I've met who will move to the city to find the partner, and they don't. As people say, the right teacher will arrive when the student is ready. The right partner will arrive when the lover is ready, and you have to have a certain type of patience. A friend of mine recently found an old love letter from his husband who died of AIDS many years ago. And one of the things he said when he was writing about finding that card was knowing that he once was loved. How many times are we loved for superficial reasons, for not reasons, throughout our lives? How many times do we love ourselves for reasons or not reasons? What are the values we place on love? Must love always be romantic with candles and violins? I love you, Joshua. What kind of high do we get from making somebody earn our love? There was a phrase I used to really love from a girl who had the same birthday as me, June 1st, commonly known as Marilyn Monroe. The phrase was something like, I'm selfish, impatient, naive. God, I don't remember it all right now. But the kicker of it was, but if you can't accept me at my worst, you sure as hell don't deserve me at my best. And for years, I was righteous about this. Because people would say like, oh, I fucking hate Geminis. Sometimes they're so loving and fun, and sometimes they're just horrible and critical. And I'm just like, girl, if you can't fucking deal with me criticizing you, then fuck off. I don't have any space for you in my life. If you can't, whatever. And a few years ago when I was working on love, I felt there is never a time when anybody is not deserving of my best. And I cried. And it was a refuge. But we still have issues of tribalism and xenophobia and scarcity, insecurity. I mean, none of us are perfect. We're all just people. We have a gazillion reasons why we should close our hearts, why we should hate, why we should avoid, exclude. Unconditional love has a practical application for allowing happiness in the self. If you ever notice any reason coming up in your mind or heart why you are unworthy of love, to just stop and be like, I love you, Dominic. It's okay. Or you can always say you love me, but I mean, you can love yourself. That's what I mean. And of course, it has a practical application in being with somebody that if you prioritize love beyond anything that they do or don't do, how many shirts a person is reasonably allowed to have in their closet, how many pairs of shoes, if they leave dishes in the sink, can you still love them? There are practical applications. I remember somebody explaining to me when I was a teenager that being happy and forgiving and loving was merely practical. He said, I'm just being selfish because being loving and forgiving is just a practical thing, because otherwise life is hell. And I was like, I remember being very offended by that thought as a teenager, that just as a matter of course you would choose to be happy and forgiving and loving. I just thought it was stupid. But fortunately, I'm not held hostage to my teenage beliefs about the world, although I guess I am somewhat. But it's just a nice thing to be able to value. The magic superpower of unconditional love, the ameliorating balm of unconditional love, the freedom available through unconditional love, finding ways to apply it to what you think of as yourself, what you think of as your lover, your family, your partners. I can admit to a certain amount of pride about trying last year to be with my family after having not spent more than a week or so with them for 20 years. Except my mother, I walked across Spain with her for 2 months, so that was just her though. The whole family dynamic's a different story. And being in the childhood home that I hated so much when I was a kid, and that state and that down, And because I have valued unconditional love and to a great deal devalued hatred and devalued sadness, because I used to really value sadness. I thought it was some kind of more true version of reality, just like poets from 150 years ago. I put myself in a situation where I could practice what I had been practicing in the crucible of our lives. And then when I told people I was doing this, a lot of people said, oh, that's what Ram Dass always said. If you really want to check your spiritual improvement, then go spend time with your family. And I hadn't framed it like that. Initially, my initial thing was these people really like me. And to a certain degree, my actions have been punishing them for staying away from them for so long. And even though if I don't understand the worth of myself to these people, I understand that there is a worth to them. And at least with my mother, I have a sustained, friendly relationship with a lot of appreciation and joy. So I was like, at least with her there, and then the rest of them I can just see what happens. And any moment of hatred that came up involving them, me, or the situation, the location, I was pretty close to the quick being able to be like, oh, it's not valuable to be hateful about this. It is not worthy at all to be angry and upset or whatever. And I won't say that I didn't get angry or hateful, but so close to when it started, I would not feed it. I would not let it live in my consciousness. I would just be like, I love these people love me. There's no reason not to love this town. I had lots of reasons, believe me. The town was harder. Not the town, the city, Indianapolis, was harder for me to overcome than my parents and my family and the house. And even the village, because when I'd driven through the village a couple of years before, I was able to see it. I was like, oh, this isn't the place that I hate at all. It's a nice little town. I don't know if I'd want to live here, but it's a nice little town. I really appreciate it. Anyway, so if I can serve as any kind of example, which I think is one of the only things that I can do in my life, is model a different version of living than what the mainstream version of reality tells us to live. I think that's one of the only super traits I actually have, superpowers or whatever. Then I'm beseeching those who hear to, if you haven't already, to examine the value of unconditional love and find ways to practice it outside of where you think it is conditionally appropriate. Because it's just one of those paths that can set you free from all the useless suffering of our lives. And it's not easy and it's not continual. I mean, I certainly have plenty of depression and anger and fear or whatever, like every other human. But learning about it as a landscape, as a concept, as a tool, as a as a water to swim in, an air to breathe. I think I can say it's dramatically changed my life. And of course, it's not independent. The unconditional love is not independent of unconditional gratitude, unconditional happiness, unconditional trust, unconditional kindness. I could go through the list that I was repeating last night, but it's not necessarily about all of that. But those help. The inner smile. It's like a dignity and a poise that we have freed ourselves from, in being able to fuck off to the horrible standards of society that have villainized us for being gay or sexual or men or white or black or Asian, any of the stupid reasons that we're unworthy of acceptance or love. We have eschewed a lot of the dignity that came with the idea of living an honorable life. Be like, fuck you, I'm gonna walk around in my pajamas and go to the China buffet. I'm free to do whatever the fuck I want. Totally true. You can post whatever you want online, there's no shame. It is a good freedom, but there is a dignity that can be attained in ourselves of finding ways to value these unconditional emotions that just make us better people. And I mean people that aren't hurting ourselves, that aren't hurting people around us, and aren't causing more suffering in the world. I could give 1,000 examples, but I think I've talked enough. I think I'll have a drink of hibiscus flower tea with some ginger. And perhaps stare out at the sea for a moment. And listen to the wisdom of the seabirds and waves. And now I'll spend a little time finishing that book. Thank you.